Hi, I'm Sydney, and today I'm going to be talking about Alien Romulus. I will start off spoiler free, and then I will let you know before I'm about to dive into that stuff, so you can stop watching if you'd like to at that point. I saw the film yesterday in theaters, and it did not disappoint. This movie has a thematic sort of groundedness and tone that's very similar to the first and second original Alien and Aliens. And while this film does take place in the timeline, which this is not a spoiler, it's promoted in the trailers and stuff, between the first and second film, so it makes sense that it tonally fits with those films, but those two films, personally, I still think are the best within the series. And so and they were made in this similar time period. So for them to try to replicate that feeling with like modern day filmmaking, I think they did a really wonderful job. This movie was cast really well, particularly the acting and tension building in this movie. The pacing in this film is really well done, really good at building tension and combining that dive into action, horror, but also doing enough groundwork that's not too tedious of character development and getting us to like the characters. There's a really nice balance of that. And what I was pleasantly surprised by is I had seen a few trailers for this film when I was in theaters watching other movies, and I kind of try to avoid marketing material for movies because it feels like these days trailers give away so much, just like visual, even if it's not story, like so many heightened visuals in the film they pull for the trailers because they're like big moments, and I just don't want to see anything. But I'd seen pretty much probably one trailer a few times. And so with that in mind, from the trailer, we see that there's a character and she shines like an x-ray through her chest, and you see one of the baby xenomorphs starting to push out. And then even on the poster that's like everywhere being promoted just on billboards is that same character with a face hugger on her face. So watching the movie, seeing that character, I anticipate like, oh, well, I know what's going to happen. So my investment I kind of was just like not wanting to invest in this character because I knew what was going to happen to them, if that makes sense. I'm like, okay, well, they're doomed. Like, okay. But the trailer, getting to the point. The trailer did not lay out a blueprint for what the movie actually was. It gave some like tonal horror atmosphere that the movie provides, but as far as like the story, the different places, the journey of the motives and the storytelling is not revealed in the trailer at all, which is like awesome. It felt very fresh and interesting watching the movie. Practical effects are incredible. I will say there is, without spoiling anything yet, some of the CGI in one particular moment is questionable, but it doesn't ruin the movie for me. But when you see it, you'll know it right away. You're going to go like, oh, okay, like it's not great. And my only like other criticism, I suppose, is that there's a few scenes in this movie that felt very dark for me. Literally, like the lighting of the image is super dark and you can't see a ton of what's going on when I felt like I should have been, which kind of felt reminiscent to, I think it's Alien versus Predator. And honestly, it was so small. It was only like a few little scenes. I was kind of nervous when a scene like that did come up and I noticed it. I was like, oh, I wish I could kind of just see it better. I got nervous, and then it didn't. That was not a consistent issue. It just happened kind of a few times. So honestly, not that big a deal. But that's how far I'm stretching for like severe criticism here. I don't really have a ton. It was awesome. It's a great popcorn movie. It's what I love in a movie, in that it's great storytelling, enough character development for me to be interested in what's going to happen to the people, building off of lore that's set up in the other films, and then also just like fun action. You know, the aliens are awesome, like death and all the like horror stuff that's just fun to watch. Now I'm gonna just jump into spoilers here. So if you don't want to know anything, then stop watching. The one criticism that I had at first watching the film and then afterwards that I was just like, man, why did they have to do it like that? It was in the elevator shaft when our main girl Rain is falling, and then the xenomorph catches her and saves her, and then like sets her down, and then just like is having a face off with her. I was like, why is the xenomorph not just annihilating her and killing her right now? This is ridiculous. It just felt like one of those classic moments where you're like, they would not be lingering this long. It's because she's the final girl. They're not pulling the trigger. Like, doesn't make sense. Actually, it does. It does make sense. It was with more time sitting, watching some YouTube videos of other people's thoughts that I've actually been convinced. And I feel like I'm probably not the only one who felt like that when watching the movie. So just in case you had that feeling as well, what makes the most sense is that they need ultimately the humans to harvest more xenomorphs, right? All the other humans on the ship are gone. And they need a body, pretty much. With the sister who had been captured earlier, and then they find her later stuck to the wall, they comment on, oh, they haven't implanted her probably because she's bleeding too much, like she's dying, so she's kind of useless. At least that's how I interpreted it. So with this character, the xenomorph has her, but then I think it doesn't just like destroy her, because it's like we actually need her for, you know, breeding, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but so that actually has logic to it, and like I'll accept that. I think Rook, that was a very fun way to tie in something that felt very nostalgic. When they first pick up his body, I guess, that's cut in half or like melted, and then we saw sort of like the silhouetting and he's in shadow, I was like, oh my god, it's because I kind of, and honestly, I was a little confused. I was like, is that Ash? That doesn't really make sense. Especially the way he was so, this Rook character was so like torn apart. It just felt so reminiscent of how Ash was at the end of the first film that it took me a second. And then I was like, oh, okay, no, it's a different android, but it's the same model, similar to Michael Fassbender's character in Prometheus and then the one after that. Unfortunately, I don't think our technology is quite there yet for his face. It just looked, in some scenes, really off and bad and so obviously like CGI'd, like video game. And then other scenes, I was like, dang, that looks really good. And I think it's so nuanced and complicated depending on like what angle they have his face at and maybe what motions and expressions his face is making, that it is such a complicated thing they're trying to accomplish. But it took me out of the movie just a little bit, because I was like watching it and being like, oh man, it's kind of off. And then the other thing, as far as story, logic, lore, that I never quite found an answer to, was for Andy, Rain takes that sort of additive chip out of Rook and puts it into Andy. And we see that spiral into him having this new agenda and blah, blah, blah. We get Rook woken up. Rook still has his clear mission of needing to bring the specimen stuff back to Wayland Corp. When Andy has that chip removed, he goes back to like his default programming of like that he's there to protect whatever's best for Rain and whatever. So I'm curious why Rook is still so hellbent on his mission even when that chip thing is removed, unless his initial like default setting is to be of service of the company and all of that. But it just felt like, I don't know, I thought that like maybe it would work similarly if that little disc was taken out of Rook, then maybe that wouldn't be his programming anymore, you know? So I'm curious if anyone has any explanation to that, let me know. And I know it's a whole other discussion as far as like, was it ethical to use his face and likeness for a film after after he's deceased, Ian Holm? I think that's such a tricky conversation. I think it really depends person to person. I don't know Ian Holm's relationship to the franchise and his feelings about the film and the series, and I don't know. I think if there's expressed permission given, then it should be fine. But if there's not, like, is it cool if the family says it's okay? And then for how much longer onward would that be acceptable for the estate to give permission? Yeah, there's a lot of like ethical questions there, because you know, what if someone's great grandkids like, yeah, go ahead and use his imagery so they can get a paycheck, you know? It is very complicated. So I don't know that I have like any strong, super educated opinions on it, but I think it's worth questioning the future of that. But for the sake of this movie, it was really fun. That humanoid xenomorph beast thing at the end was so interesting. I loved it. Creature I thought was super awesome. It was a nice way to tie it in. This film hit a lot of the same beats as sort of the original film did, as far as like on the ship, we had the Ash Rook characters still kind of advocating for the company, and then just when you think they're out of the main terror and they're off into their escape pod, more chaos ensues. A lot of those same sort of beats happen, and they work well, and I don't think that it's overplayed. It still makes sense for the story. The only time where it was a little like, okay, they're pushing it, was when Andy was like, stay away from her, you bitch. Like, I don't know, it felt very forced, and it was like, okay, we get what you're doing. Like, I don't know, that was a little much, but I won't totally like knock it. It's fine. I mean, anything, I'm trying to think of other like comments I have about the movie, and I've just been pleasantly surprised that any criticisms that I felt like I maybe initially had about things where I'm like, I feel like that wouldn't have happened, I've been able to find answers for online of like rationale. For examples, when the face huggers first come out into the water when they're locked in that room, it's like those face huggers are freaking quick. Like, they would have taken them down so fast. No, not really. Because they mention later that in cryostasis you wake up and you're kind of like hungover and slow feeling. So like that makes sense that the face huggers are slow. Or same with the chest burster later that comes out. Why is it like this cute little like fetus xenomorph, as opposed to in other ones that thing pops out and it's just like gunning? But that's because they took it off of her face prematurely, and so it didn't have time to like, it's like a premature xenomorph, so it's not really fully formed. So that's why it's all slow and different. I mentioned earlier about her in the elevator shaft, or I don't know, things like that. I'm like very satisfied with this movie. The people who made it really did their homework. They they really took the series into consideration, and they're really following through with concepts that have been introduced previously, or like if they're changing little things, they're using reasoning as to why, which I like that a lot. I also got a little bit of Fifth Element vibes. For example, when Rain at the beginning of the movie, she went to the window and she was talking about trying to get like the travel thing, and they were looking up her points. It kind of reminded me of, for some reason, in Fifth Element, like when they go up to the window and they're like scanning the multipass, and like this sort of like dystopian way of like checking identity. And I don't know, something about that, even though they're very different, but that felt reminiscent to me for some reason. There was a lot of potential for this movie to not be very good, and they did awesome. They did great. Loved it. If you decided to listen to spoilers and you still haven't seen it, I definitely recommend going to go see it. Yeah, I think that's all I got for this one. Go watch Alien Romulus. It's really fun. And I'll see you next time. Bye.